On today's Locked On Jayhawks, Riley Kugel will not be a Jayhawk, and KU football added a tight end edition in Leyton Cure.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. You can find our show with Locked On Jayhawks anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of the episode, we're talking Riley Kugel, who officially will not be coming to Kansas after committing to them out of the transfer portal, what it means impact on the rest of the offseason for KU. We will also be talking about KU football adding Leyton Cure, who, besides being an interesting player in how he could impact the team this year and maybe in the future, he's also the brother of the number one in-state recruit for 2025. So lots to talk about on today's episode. This is technically our Thursday episode, posting it a little bit early because of all the breaking news. And this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. All right, let's start with the Riley Kugel stuff, and then we'll get into how it impacts the team and then finish up with the Linkon Cure news. So Riley Kugel not coming to KU. This was according to Matt Norlander of CBS Sports earlier today. Riley Kugel won't play at Kansas. And Gary Bedore of the Kansas City Star, he kind of confirmed it with some sources as well. Riley Kugel's dad was kind of on Twitter talking about what happened here. This was unfortunately something that doesn't come as a shock after – it was they had the commitments from a couple other transfers with Zeke Mayo and AJ Storr and Riley Kugel at the time, and Storr and Mayo signed on the dotted line. And even though Riley Kugel committed before them, there wasn't news that he signed. And so it was kind of a lead up of, okay, what's going on here? Then there was certainly some smoke, and word around the block was that, and this is kind of what his dad said and everything, that it was a credit transferring issue of him like getting into KU and all that stuff. And obviously there was the podcast with Andy Katz where Bill Self kind of talked about Riley Kugel, and that in itself should have been a sign, because if you talk about a play, like that's technically an NCAA rule. What are NCAA rules at this point? But anyway, and also I think this is kind of a stupid one to begin with, but you can't talk about a player who's committed to you. They have to be signed before you can talk about him. So the fact he even talked about him and mentioned his name was probably a sign of what was to come. Now, I do want to say there were some people that have been kind of speculating, is he backing out of the commitment because KU brought in all these players? Like, he was the first one to commit out of the portal to KU, and now he's going to have more possible roadblocks for playing time and competition. Is he afraid of the competition? No, he kept like retweeting those different transfer portal pickups for KU as I almost break a table to the left of me. And he kept, being interested in it. He seemed like somebody who was willing to fight for that competition level. And I don't even know that this is about like grades necessarily. It is about credits transferring to KU. The NCAA has certain rules about players, how many credit hours they have to do like each semester. I think it's 12. I want to say is the number. I don't know what it is for like graduates, and there are certain discrepancies here and there, but it's like 12 credit hours a semester, which I believe how that works is then therefore, if you are transferring after your sophomore season, you have to have, X amount of credit hours that carry over to the next school or something like that to be able to be eligible. Right. And so it's not necessarily a great thing. Like, I don't know if you went to KU, and I was the same way. You might have had a friend or somebody that you knew who transferred in from like a junior college. Like I certainly had a couple friends who transferred in from maybe like a Johnson County Community College or one of these other community colleges. And they would just complain about, I got in and I took 30 credit hours when I was at junior college, or 60 credit hours when I was at junior college, and only like 20 of them or only 15 of them or 40 of them or whatever, like a bunch of them got axed and didn't make it over to KU. So this isn't necessarily, it's just something unfortunate that it didn't kind of transfer over. And even if you would have, maybe taken summer classes to try to catch up on those credit hours, then it's like, how many do you need? Do they offer all the right classes you need in the summer? Bill Self wants them here in the summer to begin with, just because they do all these things in the summer and start practicing and everything in the summer. So from that standpoint, it just didn't work out. And it is unfortunate because you have a really high ceiling player in Riley Kugel, who has shown really elite flashes. He's one of the better athletes in college basketball, and he grew up at one point rooting for the Jayhawks. it obviously puts one less player in competition on the wing and at the 2 and 3 man spots. We'll get to more on that here in a second. But as far as what you're losing with Kugel not enrolling, you're losing a lot of athleticism. You could argue he would have been KU's best athlete this next season. KU's losing real shot creation, especially when he's right. You're losing the high potential that Kugel brings. I mean, if he were to come in and be a starter and be one of your best players, like it's not unthinkable he could be, a top 40 pick in the NBA draft the following season. He's the, it's hard to say exactly because if you get the sophomore version, that is different than what the freshman version was. But if you're getting more of the freshman version, you would be losing a lot of scoring and shooting too by not bringing him on. Now, you do gain the ability to replace him with someone else. Maybe someone who does have a higher floor, maybe someone who is more of a true knockdown shooter, maybe somebody who is a better defender. It's unfortunate, honestly, that this happens after a bunch of commitments happened with Javon Small and Kobe Brea to some of these other schools, because now this might make even more sense. But this does kind of stink all the way around. Clearly, Kansas wanted Riley Kugel. He was their first commitment from the transfer portal. They brought him on before the NCAA tournament even came to a conclusion. They identified him early in the portal and were like, yes, we are taking you. And from Riley Kugel's perspective, it was the other way around. Clearly, he wanted to come to Kansas. He committed to Kansas that early in the game. And again, he didn't decommit from Kansas because of all the other players they brought on. He wanted to be at Kansas. And this is going to especially stink if wherever he goes next, he ends up being a stud where you're going to watch and be like, oh man, imagine if he would have been on this Kansas team this year. But you wish him well. Clearly, this was a bit out of KU's hands, I would say. Maybe you could say it was out of his hands. Again, I don't know everything that went in with why the stuff maybe didn't transfer, how much of that is on him, how much of that is just on kind of the system that it didn't work out that way, whatever. Tough to say where the blame lies, the credit stuff. But like I said, now KU has to move on. And what does this mean for the roster? What does this mean for the rest of the offseason? Let's discuss that in just a moment on Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. Let's get straight to the point. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, to pay off your debt or your mortgage, pretty much anything standing in the way of you and financial freedom, right? With Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to help reach that financial freedom. They are the number one financial destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, YahooFinance.com, the number one financial destination. YahooFinance.com, that is YahooFinance.com. How does the Riley Kugel news impact things? We'll get to that. How does it impact the rest of the offseason? Then we'll finish up with Leyton Cure, the latest addition for KU on the football field. And then this will be our Thursday episode. We'll have a Football Friday episode in addition to if any other breaking news kind of happens, and we'll get to that. So how this affects the roster? Well, when you're looking at a scholarship perspective, Kansas is sitting basically on 11 scholarships. If you want to count the Furphy one in limpo, then it'd be 12 if you just want to hold that till it's official that he stays in the draft. When you're looking at wings that are left on the roster specifically, and with Kugel, there's different types of wings. There's wings who play the 3-4. There's wings who can play the 2, 3, and 4, which was kind of like Kevin McCullough. AJ Storr is kind of the wing who plays the 3 and 4. Ryland Griffin is more of like that wing who plays the 2 and the 3, but he can play the 4 in a pinch. You have, I guess, I don't know, what do we call KJ Adams at this point? Is he a big man? Is he, I guess, more of just a traditional forward would probably be the answer there, but you could count him as a wing if you wanted to. Kugel, more of that 2-3 wing. Rakese Passmore, more of that probably 2-3 wing. Jamari McDowell, more of the 2-3 wing, probably even more of a 2, though, than a 3. I guess if we're talking about KJ Adams playing the 4 to be a quasi wing, Zach Clements in a pinch could play the 4. I'm not going to be a huge fan of that defensively, but Clements clearly is probably going to be earning more minutes this season. And then you'll see minutes with Elmarco Jackson and or Zeke Mayo where they're playing at the 2. So if you want to count that, I guess, whatever. But for the most part, if you want to just talk about true wings, I would say AJ Storr, Ryland Griffin, Rakese Passmore are kind of the true wings. Jamari McDowell, I could be argued into it. I kind of view him more as like a true shooting guard, which might be a wing, whatever you want to call it. But regardless, you still have a bunch of wings on the roster, right? Like that kind of is the case here for KU. And you could obviously add more in the transfer portal. Obviously, if you do think Furphy has a chance of coming back, that would be another possible wing you could bring back. So it's not like you are devoid of having more at this position, which is the good news. And even if KU did not add another impact player, like I would still feel good about an 8-man rotation right now of, let's say this was the 8-man rotation. No particular order, but DeJuan Harris, Zeke Mayo, Rylan Griffin, Marco Jackson, AJ Storr, KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, and then whoever your backup big man is, right? That's 8 right there, right? Whoever wins that battle between Flory and Zach Clements. Maybe Rakeese Passmore can usurp somebody into that 8, or maybe he's on the heels of it as being a 9th man. And if Self actually did expand the rotation, which is something that always feels like a good off-season conversation, then never really ends up happening. Although I will say there are some years, like you go back to like 2010, 2011, there are some years where it's like he did kind of play a 9-man rotation, but those years are fewer and far between, and it takes having a lot of talent buried throughout the bench. And maybe this team will have that. But, even though they do lose some athleticism and lose some shot creation by not bringing on Riley Kugel, the good news is that they still did add both of those with AJ Storr. Different type of athlete. I think Kugel, very quick and very bouncy athlete. Storr is more of like a power athlete, but still a good athlete. And AJ Storr obviously is a good shot creator and scorer. So you still have that when you're looking at the boxes you added. Rylan Griffin brings a bunch of shot making to the table. So, you still have that. Zeke Mayo brings a ton of, and I think Griffin's a solid athlete too. Zeke Mayo brings a ton of shot creation and shot making. Plus, whatever you end up getting from Rakeese Passmore, which, with freshmen, it really is the ultimate mystery bag of what you're going to get. But it seems like based on what he did at the prep level and in high school, like Rakeese Passmore will be a really good athlete who brings shot creation and shot making. If you haven't improved on Marco Jackson, that should be somebody who brings good athleticism. And again, where does the improvement come? Does it come from him making more shots and stuff? And then Flory Badunga brings more athleticism. So even though you don't have Riley Kugel who adds those things, you still did add a lot of things that change over those areas that you were looking for even without him, which is the good news. It's just that added a little bit more. So obviously this maybe increases the chances. I would certainly say that they add another player in the transfer portal, but I think it further increases the chances that they add an impact player in the transfer portal, right? It's one thing if they were to add another player who was going to be kind of bench fodder, maybe a future player, more of a developmental player. I think by not having Kugel, it increases your chances of adding an impact player, somebody who you feel like should be a rotation player. And I don't know who gets squeezed out of the rotation at that point in time, but point being, like Riley Kugel was viewed as being somebody who should be in the rotation. So, and he was their first commit. Like they added AJ Storr, they added Rylan Griffin even after they added Zeke Mayo after they had Riley Kugel, which means that they were planning on him being part of the rotation even when they added them, which means you still have one spot that you're kind of looking for to try to add that guy. So you're sitting on 11 scholarships, as I said, and that's assuming Furphy stays in the draft. I think at this point in time, the way you view it, you add one scholarship player and then you play with 12. And if Furphy does decide to come back and maybe surprise Bill Self and surprise people who think he's going to stay in the NBA draft, then boom, that's fine. You can make it work with 13, and then you'll use your reduced scholarship count the following season for the final one that you have to lose for the NCAA. But you add your 12th player, Furphy stays in the draft, then you still added that last player, and on top of it, you use up that NCAA sanction that you don't have to worry about it for the following year and moving forward. We're going to have a Noah Shelby episode at some point here, assuming he hasn't picked another school by then. But, maybe he can get one and be more of that developmental guy, but that might be a walk-on too, so not entirely sure. Maybe that's something where you add him, and then it's kind of dependent on, can you find another impact player? If not, then we'll just give him a scholarship. I don't know. We'll see. Jordan Ivy Curry, like a few hours after I released that episode on his deep dive, he nixed KU and released his final 3. KU was not in it, so great timing there. That and Javon Small just basically immediately after the deep dive, just nope, ain't happening. Jackson Robinson is at the Combine along with Johnny Furphy, so that'll be one, obviously, certainly to watch. We just did our Wooga Poplar deep dive the other day. Highly recommend checking that out, and thank you to the Everydayers tuning into that one. You'd already be ahead of schedule on that because maybe he becomes more Wooga popular for KU after this. I'm sorry, that was horrible. After this move with Riley Kugel, where maybe it makes it more likely there. So maybe that's possible. Haven't heard any connections on these guys, like any reported release of KU contacting or this or that. But you do wonder if there are some guys that are really talented that are in the transfer portal and in the NBA draft combine, like Cam Christie from Minnesota, Jameer Watkins from Florida State, Jalen Wells from Washington State, JT Toppin from New Mexico, who those are players who are in the portal and testing the NBA draft waters. Like any of them could stay in the NBA draft. But hypothetically, if they do decide to come back and go through with the transfer portal stuff, does this make it possible for Kansas to have extra time to kind of kick the tires on one or two of those guys? Who knows? So maybe this is just an opportunity to, replace Riley Kugel with something that maybe you felt like you felt like what you've brought in so far in the portal has been sort of the same thing: shot creation, shot making, offense. Maybe this is an opportunity to get more of a defensive player, because Kugel wasn't known for being a great defender. I mean, the synergy numbers had him below 50% both years at Florida. Maybe it's an opportunity to replace it with more of a developmental guy, like I said. Maybe it's an opportunity to place it more of a knockdown shooter. Or maybe you go for another shot creation player. Maybe you go for another athlete. Maybe you go for a similar player to what you can get with Riley Kugel. Maybe just go for the best option available. I don't know. But there are still lots of options available in terms of players out there, even though they are dwindling in a certain way. You're Kansas, you're recruiting at the top. Like, there are still options out there, and you're going to have your pick of the litter in a certain way if you want to add that last impact player, which I fully expect them to do. All right, let's continue on. KU football minute edition. Leyton Cure, a tight end from Fort Hays State. We'll discuss that next. First, this episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, futures, and more. You can bet on the Wells Fargo this week. We got the PGA Championship next week. You can pick which team's going to win the NBA title or the NHL title. MLB is going on. Royals are doing well right now. You can get in your early futures on the NFL or college football season with win total over-unders, who's going to win the Super Bowl, who's going to make the college football playoff. You can do all that. Just do it responsibly. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up, KU football has a new addition to the roster with a tight end, Leyton Cure, who transfers in from nearby Fort Hays State. So he is a 6'3", 235-pound tight end, originally from Goodland, Kansas. He went to Goodland High School. In his last 2 years of high school, he was All-State honorable mention. Then he ends up going to Fort Hays State, which obviously is at the Division II level here in Kansas. Redshirted his first year in 2021. And then as a redshirt freshman in 2022, he played in 11 games, started 7 of them, and had 281 receiving yards and was second on the team in receptions. Pretty good work for, redshirt freshman. You're talking about somebody who clearly was developing into probably a future like all-league player at Fort Hays State. He didn't have any games played in 2023. He missed the season due to injury. I don't know what the injury was. I don't know how that is affecting him getting ready for this next season in all of that. I'm assuming he can get a medical red shirt for that. That I don't totally know. If he does not get a medical red shirt for that season in 2023, missing it, then that would make him a redshirt junior here in 2024, where he would still have 2 years left to play. If he can get a medical redshirt, that would make him a fourth-year sophomore here come 2024 with 3 years left to play. Either way, you're getting multiple years out of this kid who has collegiate production, even if it's not at the D1 level. Like, we've seen guys come up from D2 and have a lot of success. Obviously Dominic Pooney turned into, and I almost feel silly even having to bring that up, because that is kind of a once in a generation type thing where a guy transfers up from D2, not just becomes it's one thing for a guy to transfer up from D2 and be a solid player. That happens more than you'd think across the country. It doesn't happen very often where the guy from D2 transfers up and then becomes a day 2 NFL draft pick, right? Like, that stuff is a little bit lighter, but point being, like, if you can play, you can play. And apparently Jeff Grimes really liked what he saw in the portal and on film and everything. Grimes, the offensive coordinator and the tight ends coach. He ended up getting offers from Arkansas State, Old Dominion, and Texas State. I'm not sure if this for Kansas is a scholarship or a preferred walk-on, PWO. I thought Kansas was out of scholarships after they made the additions of Emil Herring and Bai Job. So just based on that, I'm assuming that it's a preferred walk-on, which this is something we've kind of brought up, whether it's been talking basketball or football, like, and there was literally an Athletic article talking about this a few weeks ago, how schools like Michigan and Nebraska and some of these other schools are basically using NIL to fund having more scholarship players, to have 90, 95, 100 scholarship players, where you have some extra players past the 85 scholarship limit that they're not on scholarship, but you're paying them NIL that covers their tuition and board and everything, to where they basically are on scholarship, right? And it wouldn't shock me at all if that's the case here for Leyton Cure. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, in-state tuition and everything, but for him to, I'd imagine he had a full ride scholarship as being a really good player at Fort Hays State, to come to Kansas, even with in-state tuition, would not shock me if it's just basically NIL funding to basically buy an extra scholarship. And it's a smart workaround of the rules that a lot of other good schools are doing. So, you know, more power to you if you can afford it with your NIL game. So I guess more power to the donors in helping provide that, if that is indeed the case of what happened here. It helps with KU's tight end room that it thinned out a little bit with the Deshaun Hanukkah injury. And I don't expect Cure to come in and be a like-for-like replacement with Deshaun Hanukkah. Like, Hanukkah was probably going to be the starting tight end for KU this season. We'll see how much Cure gets on the field. Again, I don't know what the injury was. Like, is it going to be something where he has a slow recovery process for a year before he's back to being, what he's used to being in another year from now? I don't know. But the way you look at it with the tight end room, you got Trevor Kardell and Jared Casey at the top. And then there's kind of a wide open competition for the third tight end on the roster. Tavita Noah, who's the experienced guy, Jaden Ham, who's got a ton of potential, but is still young and kind of raw and figuring it out. I mean, he was at a high school in Eudora who was running like triple option. So you're adjusting to that. You have some preferred walk-ons in Quentin Conley. And then if Leyton Cure is a preferred walk-on or whatever, but you're going to have competition for that tight end 3, and that player is going to get on the field. Kansas runs a lot of 2 and 3 tight end sets, and that's before, you hope you don't have any injuries, but if anybody gets banged up along the way, okay, hello tight end 3, hello tight end 4 getting on the field. So I think there's a real chance Leyton Cure does get on the field this year for KU. And of course, beyond all that, what he brings to the table of note beyond this season is, for the future, his brother, Linkon Cure, is the top-rated high school player in the state of Kansas for the class of 2025. I mean, it doesn't hurt. It certainly doesn't hurt to have your brother on the roster recruiting you every day, texting you every day. And, for Linkon, maybe he wants to play with his brother, and maybe that's something he didn't think he'd have an opportunity to do because, obviously being the top recruit in the state, he was probably going to end up at like a Power 5. But now that his brother is at a Power 5 too, maybe that opportunity is there. And that would only make this for a dynamic little Kansas 2-step for KU if that does end up happening. But at the very least, Leyton Cure does help the tight end room for KU in 2024 and beyond, because following this season too, you're going to lose Jared Casey and Trevor Kardell, and you're going to need some other players to step up, and maybe that can be Leyton Cure. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. Again, this is our Thursday episode, so barring any breaking news, we'll be back on Friday for a Football Friday episode of the show with LOJ.